Welcome, friends, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of Strata's Orchestration Kitchen. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about managing app access when using multiple IDPs. And joining me in the kitchen today is Chef Terry Cozard, as usual. I am your host, Mark Callahan. I'm on the product marketing team here at Strata, and today we're going to dig into one of those spicy identity challenges that a lot of people face. And it doesn't at first blush seem that common, but it actually is quite common, that scenario of having multiple IDPs. Agenda-wise, we're going to follow the same flow that we do for our typical orchestration kitchens. And from looking at how the session is going to go today, we're going to lead off with a quick TLDR on what is identity orchestration. That's always important just to help set the tone for the technology that makes the cooking possible, so to speak. And today we're going to do a little bit of a twist on things. We're actually going to blend the whiteboarding and the live demo together at the same time. Isn't that right, Chef Cozart?
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually going to show you how architecturally it builds as a part of the orchestration user journey this time. So we're going to actually flex some of the muscles so that we're cooking with a little extra spice in our kitchen today.
Love it. Love it. Well, we've got our spatulas ready. We're going to get going. And you notice that at the end here, we have Q&A. Please feel free throughout the course of this episode to use the question button that you'll see on the screen to share any questions that you'd like to share with us. And we'll be sure to get to those. If not during the presentation proper, we'll certainly get to those at the very end. So without further ado, let's sort of lead off with that identity orchestration at a glance.
Absolutely. So identity orchestration, if this is your first introduction to it, we know there's a lot of vendors that are using this buzzword that's out there. We like to think of ourselves as pioneers of this space. We've been doing this for 4 years now, so this is more than just a marketing rebranding for us. But the way that we think about identity orchestration is the ability to decouple any or all of the common identity services that you may interact with through your applications or through be those modern or legacy-based applications. So the common services that we see people needing to interact with is authentication services, access control, and MFA. Those are frequently bundled in your identity provider today. So part of what we're going to be showing you today is what happens if you have multiples? If you merge with another company who has a different technology footprint? What happens if you're divesting from a company and you're making duplicates of everything, but for that coexistence period, everyone still needs to get across boundaries, but still authenticate the way that they want? Then we can go source attributes about you wherever you need. If it's outside of the IDP, that's no problem. We can make authorization decisions, and we can make external web services calls. We're actually going to show you a lot of this in today's recipe today, because we're really going to cook with a lot of spice. But then the secret sauce about how we think of as identity orchestration is that we then take all of the inputs that we've seen throughout the identity services that we've integrated with, and then we transform it into a way that the application natively understands. So you can take advantage of all this richness of capability without rewriting the application or even changing it in many cases. So it doesn't matter if the application may be written at a time that precedes federation. It could be a legacy-based application. It could be kind of those Java-based applications, the PeopleSofts of the world, and they can be full citizens in this type of a pattern as well by virtue of our infrastructure as code distributed identity orchestration fabric.
That's great. And so I know we often talk about app types or application patterns, and that's not going to be too much of a focus of today, because we're talking more on the front end of this around the identity providers themselves. But without burying the exciting part to all this is that, as you said, there are no changes to the app. The app is none the wiser that anything has changed, whether it's getting a user from a single IDP, 2 IDPs, 3 IDPs. It's none the wiser throughout this process.
That's exactly right. And because that's the job of the fabric. It's our job to know when and where one can go to this place or that place, when and where they're authorized to do this or that. That's the value of the fabric, is you get to make simple declarative statements that does that routing logic for you, so the application doesn't need to be rewritten to do that advanced logic.
Got it. Well, you mentioned just in passing there, and let's pause here for just a moment on the screen and just think about a couple of those reasons that you discussed about why an organization would have multiple IDPs. Looking at the news this morning, saw that Loom was acquired by Atlassian. There's M&A activity happening every single day, and in doing so, you've got new co, you've got old co, and in bringing those two together, 9 times out of 10, they're using completely different IDPs. And even if they're using the same vendor, whether it's Okta, Azure AD, you name it, it's still seen as two different IDPs as they're coming together in the new co. Isn't that right?
That's exactly right. So if in the classic merger acquisition, that if you're coming in from the newly acquired company, NewCo, you're still going to authenticate the way that you originally did until some future date where everything gets rationalized into that same environment. But your HR, your benefits, all those things that are going to be assumed by OldGo, the company that acquired you, are probably administered by a different technology. And historically, the way that Federation technologies grew up is that the application, the benefits in this case, would be tightly coupled to its identity provider. Well, that's great. That's OldCo. But you just got acquired, so you're not there yet, or not fully rationalized there yet. So rather than saying, look, here's your username and password for how you've been doing your work, and here's a brand new one for the new organization that just acquired you, we can set aside all of that silliness. You're already known to NewCo, so why do you need to replicate those kinds of things? It's trivial to have multiples of any of these services, not just authentication. We focused on that for the recipe because it's visually obvious, but we're also going to do that for authorization logic in this recipe too, that once we've authenticated you, then we're going to say, well, now we know about you as a user. You could have different hats. You could be a basic user or an administrator for this particular application. And we can do that context switching just that quickly. And I'll show you how all this works.
That's great. And as you think about M&A and transactions, the board, of course, that's authorized this sort of transaction, they want to see immediate value for their investment, for the acquisition. And, I smirk a little bit because you talked about you're going to get a new username and password, NewCo, OldCo. I've actually been through a couple of acquisitions myself. And in one of those, I was issued a second laptop. And I was told to use system over here, completely discrete, and months later, still on two separate laptops because there wasn't an opportunity to do this. And it was just really, really awkward. And you just think about like the loss of efficiency and the loss of innovation that happens in an M&A scenario. It's profound, and so we think about ways that you could unintentionally or accidentally or didn't see it coming, multiple IDPs. But there's also strategic reasons for multiple IDPs as we think about maybe different user types. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a myriad reasons as to how and why this could happen. Why don't we just segue into showing you what the art of the possible is?
Sounds great.
Fantastic. Let's actually switch over to this environment. So what I'm trying to do here is, unbeknownst to the end user, we're actually sitting between the user and the application. It doesn't matter if the application is a modern one or a legacy one. As I mentioned before, we're sitting in that user journey. So what's happening now is the Mavericks orchestrator, our fabric, is actually sitting in front of you and sitting in front of that application journey and saying, we don't yet know who you are. Let's go ahead and authenticate you. So this web page that you're seeing is actually delivered by our orchestrator. We don't often do this. You certainly don't have to let your users know that Strata ever even exists, but it does show nicely for a demonstration. So here, I've got 4 different identity providers, all of them different tenants that are unique to themselves, all with a different user population that they can serve. So the user can either opt into which one they go to, or we can do more advanced routing logic that says, give us your username, and then we'll make forking logic based on that. We could glean information about where you're coming in from based on the source IP address. If you're coming in from NewCo, we're just going to automatically send you to NewCo. There's lots of different ways to do it. But for demonstration purposes, we're just going to let the users opt in.
Got it. And that makes sense. So in the scenario of if I came in as Mark at Strata versus M. Callahan or Chef Mark, those might be 3 different user profiles that I have in 3 different user types. But you could automatically suss out who that is without having the dropdown itself. You were just showing the dropdown for display purposes.
That's exactly right.
Gotcha.
So we'll go ahead and kick off this party, and we're going to go ahead and log into, in this case, intro. And if I could type sonar, that would still be wrong.
Still, as everyone knows, this is live demos. So yes, no smoke and mirrors. This is all real cooking in the kitchen.
Absolutely. Got the spices moving. All right. So now we went to Entra ID for authentication. It may or may not have wanted to do multi-factor checks. That's really how it gets configured. And so we hand off to your IDP what it does so it can do what it does really, really well. And then it came back to us. And now you'll notice we're still not at the application. We went back to the orchestrator because now if you remember that introduction to orchestration, we're now saying we know who you are. You have successfully authenticated, but now there are additional gates that we want to go through. So what happened behind the scenes, it goes so quickly, and that's why we created this pause point, is we actually called out to an external API engine to say, look, Alan has successfully logged into Entra ID or wherever. And now he's trying to get access to an application, and sometimes he can get access to that application as a business analyst. Other times he can come in as an administrator. So Alan can tell us, what context am I coming into the application? This, again, isn't ever required, but it certainly flexes some of the muscles that we can do for orchestration. And the way that we do that is through our runtime execution of everything that we do. So following down here in step 1, this is pretty much identically to what we built out here for you. The user comes in and they try to get to an application on the right. Doesn't matter what type. We then kick out to one of the authentication providers based on the type of the user it is. And then when it comes back to us after that successful authentication, Entra ID sent me back information in the form of claims about Alan. I know his email address, I know his first name, last name, maybe some basic role level information, whatever Azure is set up to give me. Now we can do all kinds of great things. I can go to an LDAP directory and I can get additional information about Alan, so I can use it for policy decisions. I can use it to decorate a session for personalization for customers. I can go ahead and do additional things so that I can get the right context to the application just at the moment that it's needed. But there's also lots of other power and flexibility that can happen here. If you have a central authorization engine, Plain ID, Axiomatics, Amazon verified permissions, whatever it is that's important to your organization, either now or into the future, we can make callouts to gather the context, pass it to those engines, and then they decide whether or not we allow or disallow the access. And then ultimately, we supercharge the token that the application is natively expecting. So in this case, we're going to go to an application that's built just before Federation technologies are there. And so we're going to take some of the information that we got from the IDP, and then we're going to supercharge it with the additional information that we did at runtime before they get out there. And architecturally, this happens similar to the subway slide that I showed you earlier. It doesn't matter what we're using or how many identity providers are in the ecosystem. They're just parts of the fabric that we interact with. And then we can call out to other stuff and then ultimately let you out to the application wherever you need to be. So let's show this whole thing wrapping up. I'll actually go to the application itself and we'll show the summation of that. Now, the application is not terribly exciting. It's just a reference application just to show you how the recipe can be cooked. But what I want to call your attention to is we built this application to echo back the things that it knows about the user. So here we got the first name and last name. We got those directly from Entra ID, but the orchestration fabric swizzled that into the token for this particular application. But over here in the roles, this was actually the user saying, what role am I going to come into? This tells the application what permissions can he have using this context. If Alan wants to log out and log back in and come back in as that business analyst, he would have a different role definition here, all because we were able to make that runtime call out and get that information there. So tremendous amount of power. I know it goes quickly, but we've really done some things that previously weren't possible in a lot of organizations. We've done this by including multiple different places to authenticate. That also has another permutation for our customers as well, is that say, what happens, heaven forbid, your identity provider of choice goes offline? What if they dig up the fiber optics in your outside of the building, but you still have to have people interacting with the applications? Well, the orchestration fabric can help there too, because rather than pivoting to another cloud-based identity provider, we could pivot to maybe a directory that's close by or some ephemeral store. So identity orchestration as a concept really gives you flexibility and capability beyond what has traditionally been there, and we do it simply in declarative form as infrastructure as code. So we deploy in minutes, not months, and we can help you solve these very, very complex challenges.
This is probably a great place to interject a question that we just got from Eric, which was, we had talked about bringing in user information from attributes. Could you bring in user information from multiple IDPs in the same request?
Yeah, you bet. It's actually not uncommon, especially in this merger pattern, to say, look, I authenticated using Auth0, but some of the information about me exists in Okta. Well, not a problem. That's one line of configuration that says we're going to still authenticate you to Azure for the time being until you're fully rationalized over in there. But some of the information we need to source from Okta or anywhere else, and then we can go ahead and get there. We'll supercharge that token and hand it to the application natively. Great question, Eric.
That's great. That's great. No, and so is there any limit to how many of these we could do? I think we looked at the drop down, and again, for display purposes only, but it was 4 or 5. Could there be more? I mean, granted, we're getting kind of like large here, but just out of curiosity, does it make any difference?
There really isn't. We've actually even talked to organizations that have thousands of different identity providers, and you can imagine what space that they might participate in. But that didn't really cause us to blush at all. There's no reason why we couldn't handle any number of those, because the orchestration fabric is distributed. We can put it where it needs to be, and it's high performant. And we could do. I would believe we could handle any need of scale or complexity that any of our customers may need.
And I won't put you on the spot here, because I know we didn't necessarily can it for this to show in this presentation, but as we add the different IDPs, this is as simple as going into Mavericks and actually just adding into the identity fabric the IDPs that you're going to be using.
That's exactly right. And so the fabric is just a matter of declaring how many members or elements of the fabric that you need, and then picking and matching what you need or want. Now, it will be very clear that when you want the orchestrator to put up a page, if you do, oftentimes you won't, we have this extensibility fabric called service extensions. So we can write some small little code snippets to do these kind of represent the HTML or do some exotic logic or something like that. So we can do it through a number of ways, but in many cases, it's just exactly like you said, just adding the declaration in the fabric, and then you're off to the races.
That's great. I mean, it's cooking in minutes is really what it is. Any chance you could go back to the screen with the wireframes for just a moment? I don't know if I could put you on the spot for that. So as we think about this, so Naomi was actually asking right here, you guys are talking about multiple simultaneous IDPs, but wouldn't you just want to merge them into one? I mean, that's a totally fair question.
Yeah. No, that's exactly the goal. In most of our customers that are following the merger and acquisition pattern, the goal is to get to one. That's absolutely right, because why would you have these multiple investments if you could avoid it? So that's definitely the goal. But the reality of that is that there's a coexistence period that, again, in the merger and acquisition pattern, you're always going to start with disparate technology footprints, and you want to get to one, whatever that may be for your organization. And so in that coexistence period, then you have the ability to do that. But when it's time to deprecate and turn off that new code things that are no longer needed in the new organization, no problem. We can help you with that process as well. But now you can use orchestration for more advanced things, for those exotic use cases to change context, supercharge your tokens, even for that when you turn off the new infrastructure.
Got it. And I would actually add, Naomi, as you asked that question, is the thought that as you think about the different types of users that are accessing your organization's resources, I know there's a number of academic institutions who are on the call today. As you think about students so faculty versus students versus staff, you may actually have a separate IDP for each of those purposefully, and yet they still need to access common resources. As you think about an organization that has customers and partners, those may be managed in Salesforce, while your workforce identities are managed in an Okta or a Microsoft Entra ID. Yet again, you want them to be able to access common resources. And so other reasons that you would likely have multiple IDPs at the same time. So
absolutely.
Great. And then I guess, Stephen, I'm going to phrase this a little bit differently, but I think he's asking about multiple instances of the same IDP. I think that the question is about same vendor, perhaps.
Sure. Yeah, that's also very common as well. In complex organizations, it's not uncommon for us to hear that the organizational standard is Okta. I'll just pick on them for a moment. But this department or this organization has their own tenet of Okta. Still the same technology, but they're kind of islands unto themselves. We absolutely can do that in the exact same way, just as we did in our demonstration today.
That's great. And I love that you mentioned coexistence, because this recipe today specifically also harkens back to some of the earlier kitchens that we did where we talked about migration. And as you are moving from one older IDP to a modern one, even with Mavericks, it may not be something that necessarily happens overnight. And what we're providing is that coexistence capability for those two IDPs to have no interruption in access to resources.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so one of the other cool things that we get asked a lot about in that coexistence model is that, say, you want to get to an application that's natively protected or historically protected by the old co infrastructure, but you still want to use your new co credentials. We can help you with that. We just showed it to you. But how do you make sure that the user only logs in once, regardless of where they start? And so that's another thing that we can help with, is that if you start going to an application that's protected by our Fabric, we can actually mint sessions in both environments. So it doesn't matter if you're a new co-employee or an old co-employee or business partner or customer. You authenticate once, and then you get single sign-on spanning both of the ecosystems. So that's a pretty neat little trick that we can do for you as well, so that you don't have to log in once using your credentials and then another time, regardless of whether or not we're protecting the application or not.
Love it. I mean, it almost feels like identity orchestration should be something in the toolkit of every investment banker and private equity group out there as they look to bring organizations together, or as you talked about, divestitures themselves as they're looking to cleave off. But being able to hit the ground running immediately the day after the transaction closes is incredible. That's simply not possible with anything else. I mentioned the scenario of having two laptops and those two laptops persisting months and months after the transaction closed. The loss of efficiency is out of control. And so I think that what you're seeing here is just a really great best practice as you think through those M&A scenarios. Specifically, that this would help. So I love everything that we talked through today. As we think about next steps, perhaps, Terry, as they're looking, people might have questions on the call. We love that everybody's joining us and continues to join us for the Orchestration Kitchen. So please be sure to check out the Kitchen Hub to see our past episodes as well as see what's coming up next. But what if somebody wanted to get out and actually just start cooking today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way to start cooking is just go to mavericks.strata.io. Everyone can sign up for a free trial. I'll be very clear, though. What I showed you here with the multiple IDPs takes a little bit of service extension work. We're happy to walk you through that, but you may not be comfortable doing that on your first day in with the platform. Nonetheless, we'll get you set up for that. If you want a little, if you have any questions, or if you just want some one-on-one time with me or my team, feel free to reach out to me directly. Terry@strata.io.
Awesome. Well, we as always, thank you, Terry, for joining me today and sharing with the audience. But most especially, thank you, our audience, for spending your time with us. I know this was kind of a whirlwind tour of supporting multiple IDPs that are accessing a common resource, but it's really cool to see this in action because of all the various use cases that we talked about, why you either accidentally or strategically have multiple IDPs in an organization. And there's a very simple means for supporting that common application resource access. And so really enjoyed this one today, Terry. I know it was just the two of us, but thank you for joining us. And to everyone in our audience, please join us for our next kitchen episode. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.